Putin is getting desperate. Not only has he introduced another country into the battle, in the form of North Korean soldiers joining Russia on the battlefield, but he's ramping up his threats of nuclear retaliation with the signing of a new nuclear doctrine. His series of red lines have so far been nothing but threats, but there's always the chance he could make those threats a reality. What if the West discovered Putin planned to use his nukes? Enough would be enough for the Western leaders, which would lead them to ask a question: how can the West destroy Russia? In this video, we'll dive into a high-stakes scenario where the West decides to end Putin's regime once and for all, exploring the strategies they might use, the risks they'd face, and what it would really mean to destroy Russia once and for all. In the aftermath of Russia's invasion of Ukraine on February 24, 2022, many observers in the West were quick to predict Putin's imminent downfall. Throughout 2022 and 2023, it was widely predicted that the combination of internal opposition to the war, failure on the Ukrainian battlefield, and in particular, the impact of sanctions on an unprecedented scale would topple Putin and bring Russia to its knees. That hasn't happened yet. Putin actually seems to have plenty of support in Russia. In March 2024, Putin won a landslide victory in the Russian presidential elections by an 87% margin. Western commentators were quick to point out that the reason he received so much of the vote was due to any opposition being exiled, executed, or imprisoned. In an election where there's only one real candidate, Putin is going to come out on top every time. Fear seems to influence the Russian voter. It's this fear that explains why support for Russia's military actions in Ukraine has remained stubbornly steady. Polls conducted by the Levada Center, an independent Russian research center, shows that Russian support for the war has held firm from February 2022 through October 2024. But everyday Russians may not actually back Putin's special military operation. It's just that saying no to the war brings with it a risk that many Russians don't want to bear. However, there are a brave few who stand against Putin. Approximately 1 million Russians, mostly of the liberal, higher-income bracket, West-leaning variety, fled Russia in the immediate aftermath of the invasion and the announcement of general mobilization that followed 7 months later. Those departures could end up playing a key role in Russia's downfall. Many of the country's best and brightest have already fled Putin's authoritarian regime, meaning they're not available for Russia to call upon in the future. That could have devastating effects on Russia's economy as the West tries to take it down. Who better to help with the destruction of Russia than those who have fled and know the country inside out? Speaking of Russia's economy, that could also present an opportunity to the West. Overall, adjusted for purchasing power parity, PPP, a metric regarded by economists as a better measure of the standard of living than nominal GDP, Russia's total GDP has more than tripled since Putin came to power. According to the IMF estimates, Russia's global GDP (PPP) ranking has improved significantly, rising from 9th in 1999 to 4th by 2024. This places Russia ahead of countries like the UK, France, and Italy, though Spain had already been behind Russia in 1999. That may make it seem like living in Russia is all rosy, but dig behind these headline figures and you'll start to see plenty of signs that Russia's economy is not as strong as it might seem. The ruble has cratered since Putin invaded Ukraine, breaking through the 100 per dollar mark both in 2023 and most recently in November 2024. Inflation has also shot up, hitting 9.5% by the end of December 2024. Higher inflation leads to higher interest rates too. Russia's base rate is 21%, with high inflation being partially to blame. Russia's economy is in danger of overheating as its people struggle with a cost of living crisis. That gives the West plenty of opportunities to twist the knife and hurt Putin. But more on that later. It's amidst that culturally and economically confused backdrop that the West will be taking out Putin to obliterate Russia. So we come to the obvious question: how could it be done? One option is to try and kill him. That's a big ask. Russia has a special federal agency called the Presidential Security Service, or SBP, devoted to protecting Putin, along with Prime Minister Mikhail Mishustin and their families. This force, consisting of thousands of highly trained security personnel, reportedly checks everyone who comes near him with a fine-tooth comb, carries a portable lab to test the air wherever he goes, and examines everything he eats and drinks. He's arguably the most difficult president on Earth to get near without an appointment. But suppose an assassin or targeted drone strike could infiltrate the extreme security and actually kill Putin in the near future. Perhaps this could be accomplished by means of a mole in his security personnel who could get close enough to shoot him, a sniper at a public event, or an explosive dropped from a sneak drone attack. That might be enough. It would open the door for a new leader, perhaps a West-friendly one, which could be enough to destroy the Russia we have right now and replace it with one that meshes better with the Western-led geopolitical climate. The likes of Mikhail Mishustin, who is Russia's prime minister and who opposed Putin's invasion, might prove a compromise for the West. An ambitious hope, perhaps, but a possibility. Another option would be to go all in with a devastating attack using weapons of mass destruction, the thinking that even if Putin retained his grip on power in the aftermath, he'd be ruling over ashes. This strategy is problematic, especially if the end goal is to take control of and exploit Russia's great resource wealth. And given Russia's vast nuclear arsenal of nearly 6,000 warheads, there's nothing to say that he wouldn't strike first if he gets a whiff of a Western nuclear threat. Even if the West, particularly Europe, somehow survived such an event unscathed enough to even think about extracting Russia's resources, doing so in a highly radioactive environment isn't going to be much fun, or without significant costs both financial and human. A NATO invasion of Russia is also, according to their nuclear doctrine, guaranteed to cause nuclear war if it looks like it's gaining any traction. Besides, NATO doesn't actually have the stockpile of weapons or manpower necessary to successfully invade Russia today, and won't for several years at a minimum. It takes time to gear a nation into a war economy, let alone one that works. So a full-on war of any kind is a very risky strategy with dubious returns. A smarter strategy is required. Perhaps elimination of Putin from within. But how likely is a public uprising or a coup? At the moment, the answer is not likely at all. As mentioned earlier, much of the liberal, West-leaning opposition to Putin has either fled the country or, at best, been emasculated. The much more hardcore far-right elements of Russian society, particularly the elites, known as the Siloviki, have been largely disempowered or co-opted by Putin too. As for the financial elites, to put it bluntly, they were offered a choice by Putin some years ago. Either stay in Russia and align themselves with his interests and make a fortune, leave the country with some of your money, if you're lucky, or leave headfirst through a penthouse window. Those who stayed are now reaping the benefits of high interest rates on domestic capital and massive state spending on their companies, even as net wealth drops due to sanctions. So right now, it's hard to see how these elites might be able to dislodge Putin and his close-knit inner circle, even if they were willing. However, as the old saying goes, capital flows where it's treated the best. Find a way to help those elites make more money, and you have the foundation of Putin's downfall. How could the West incentivize this portion of Russia's population? That's where our strategy, containing 4 strategic elements, comes into play. A strategy that, if done right, could weaken Putin to the point where he falls and Russia goes down with him. Step 1. Weaken Putin militarily. Ukraine has done a good job there, grinding down his manpower, weapon stockpiles, and troop morale in a war of attrition. Creating more problems requiring Russian military intervention, forcing the dedication and dilution of more Russian forces would add to Russia's problems. There are multiple theaters where the West could provoke manageable confrontations of this kind. Transnistria, the pro-Russian autonomous breakaway region of Moldova, has been a flashpoint waiting to happen for years. It hosts a smallish contingent of Russian peacekeeping forces, whose main objective is to safeguard the Kubazna ammunition depot, which contains approximately 20,000 tons of Soviet-era weapons and ammunition. Perhaps Ukraine, or even Moldova, could instigate a provocation similar to Ukraine's Kursk incursion to seize control of the cache and draw Putin into diverting manpower and equipment into the region to try and wrest it back. Georgia is another big problem for Putin. Things have been heating up there politically, with a pro-Western president increasingly at odds with a pro-Russian parliament, and the people seemingly quite divided. The nation is bracing itself for revolution. Putin could be obliged to intervene militarily, as he did in Georgia in 2008, if things start getting out of control. There are also violent elements within the separatist movements in several predominantly Muslim republics within the Russian Federation that could be provoked to take military action against Putin. The idea here is to force Putin into spreading himself so thin militarily that Russia as a whole becomes weaker. Remember that this is a country that has already lost over 750,000 of its people to the Ukraine war. A combination of several states forcing an already weakened Russia into a multi-front war, with support from the West, has the potential to lead to a total military collapse. Number 2, weaken trust in the state, particularly in his ability to provide security. To some extent, Ukraine's drone attacks on civilian areas inside Russia are aimed at achieving exactly this, especially the almost daily attacks on the city of Belgorod. Russia tried to characterize these types of attacks as acts of terrorism. Forcing that propaganda machine into overdrive could cause it to break down, leaving Russia's higher-ups scrambling to explain why so many of the country's people are dying under Putin's supposed protection. Ukraine has already shown that it can pull off these sorts of domestic attacks in response to Putin's actions in Ukraine. The bomb planted in the back of the truck that exploded on the Kerch Bridge on October 8, 2022, killing the driver and 4 people in adjacent cars, stands out. But there was also the car bomb that blew up journalist and activist Daria Dugina, daughter of influential political philosopher Alexander Dugin, on August 20, 2022, and the bomb in a statuette that killed prominent pro-war military blogger Vladlen Tokarsky and injured 42 others on April 2, 2023 in a St. Petersburg restaurant. The convicted perpetrator, Russian anti-war activist Daria Trepova, testified at her trial that she was following orders from a contact in Ukraine named Gestalt. These car bombs and others have dented confidence in Putin's security apparatus, and when combined with our third method, this chipping away at Putin's armor would prove essential. So what is the third method? Number 3. Weaken social cohesion within the country. There are possibly over 190 different ethnic groups considered nationalities in Russia, speaking over 100 different languages. Separatist movements have been harshly suppressed, with separatism being banned in 2013. That creates xenophobia inside Russia, which leads to more internal attacks. On March 22, 2024, 4 assailants from Tajikistan stormed the popular Crocus City concert hall, killing 145 civilians and injuring hundreds more. ISIS took responsibility for the attacks, which the FSB claimed were funded and coordinated from Ukraine. In the aftermath, Russia launched a brutal crackdown on migrants, which has inflamed tensions between the majority Slavic Russians and other ethnic groups, straining relations with neighbors like Tajikistan, Kazakhstan, and Uzbekistan. The bulk of Russia's estimated 11 million migrant laborers came from these states. All of these things damage Russia's sense of national self, as well as the belief that Putin can protect the Russian people. And that brings us to the fourth method, digging into economic pressure points. Methods available to the West include sanctions, confiscation of assets, diplomatic isolation, and taking out economic infrastructure like the Nord Stream pipelines. Since March 2022, the US has imposed more than 4,800 sanctions on Russia, the UK over 1,800 sanctions on Russian individuals and companies, and the EU more than 2,100. And every few months there's another round. At the time of the producing of this video, the total of all sanctions imposed on Russia by various countries was around a whopping 19,535. Most Russian banks have also been kicked out of the SWIFT financial messaging system, which handles the vast majority of transactions between financial institutions around the world. This has left both the state and Russian companies and banks with a huge problem of trying to pay for imports or receive payment for exports, a major blow. But the economic measure that's had the most impact is the confiscation of assets. Combined, the EU and the US have frozen or confiscated an estimated $300 billion in Russian foreign reserves. That's just under half of its total reserves. They're now starting to use the proceeds from those assets to fund Ukraine, including military aid, assigned to Russia's elite that Putin can't protect their money. Have these measures worked? The short answer is yes. Of course, the loss of access to half its foreign reserves, inability to use the financial system, and remove some of its major trading partners have hurt Russia. Even the US would be reeling from that many sharp blows to the jaw simultaneously. Currency volatility, shortages, high inflation and interest rates, increasing private and corporate debt, and labor market instability have been some of the results. Sanctions have also bitten Russia hard. It's on its way to becoming technologically backward, and though Russia has managed to skirt sanctions between launching a shadow fleet of oil tankers to ship oil under the table, using middlemen for imports and exports, finding alternative suppliers and boosting domestic production, many of the trade holes have been plugged. The West's secondary sanctions are stopping those measures. But there are challenges. The seizing of Russian assets and cutting off Russia from SWIFT, acts that Putin calls weaponization of the dollar, sent shockwaves through the non-Western world. For decades, a major factor in the US's dominance over the world has been based on the world's trust that the US was the safest haven to store and grow wealth. Why? Because the dollar was safe. Some of the countries with which Putin deals may not feel that way anymore. Instead of a safe haven, thanks to the threat of sanctions, storing wealth in the West has become a risk. So the nations of the world have acted to limit their exposure. Many of the bigger non-Western nations, most notably China, have been offloading US bonds and other assets at a record rate and buying gold at record rates instead, and the gold price is at an all-time high as a result. Would removing Putin from the picture cause this trend to reverse and the nations of the global south to come flocking back under Western influence? It's possible, but although he was instrumental in bringing the pieces of the puzzle closer together, this multipolar movement hardly pivots around Putin. That could be an advantage for the West. The West's goal, especially the US's, should be to reinforce its own economic strength by rebuilding relationships with the nations that Russia has managed to court. Rewards could be given to those countries that don't provide Russia with a way to skirt its sanctions. As the Royal United Services Institute, or RUSI, points out, G7 countries remain the biggest trading partners for the global south. The West must bring that experience to bear. The US in particular must lean on its position to show those countries Putin has used to get around sanctions that it offers a better way. Increasing trade with these nations while allaying their fears around sanctions is key, Take South Africa as an example. RUSI notes that South Africa may be pushed into Russia's economic arms by the West cracking down on the correspondent banking practices that have allowed Russia to get around sanctions. Such crackdowns create the worry of secondary sanctions affecting South Africa's economy, with the South African Reserve Bank going so far as to point out that the political implications of secondary sanctions for the South African economy are severe. Still, South Africa is keen to comply with the G7 sanctions, RUSI says. The West must give it a pathway to do so without damaging the country's economy as it tries to destroy Russia, and it must roll out that approach to every other developing economy that's cozying up to Russia. Diplomacy is the key. Western diplomats will need to do more to understand and engage with the complex economic security concerns on-the-fence nations like South Africa present. Much of the global south that Russia courts can be brought back around as long as the West realizes that the loss of economic stability is a major threat to these nations. Implemented simultaneously, all of these strategies might topple Putin and bring Russia to its knees given enough time. Russia is already massively weakened militarily by Putin's ill-advised special military operation. The hundreds of thousands that have died on the battlefield of Ukraine could become millions if the West successfully encourages the likes of Transnistria and Georgia to rise against Putin's oppression. They would force Putin to fight a war on multiple fronts, spreading his soldiers and supplies thinner, which could even open the door for a NATO-led war against Russia using Ukraine, Transnistria, and Georgia as the three fronts. Putin's inability to stop that war would help weaken trust in the state, with that weakening trust being exacerbated by more attacks in Russian territory. We're already seeing signs that the supposed popular support for Putin is waning in some areas of Russia. For instance, November 2024 brought with it a report of a small group of people in the border village of Olgovka coming together to pen an open letter to Russia's president. "We ask you to end this cursed war, which has claimed the lives of many innocent people," the letter read. "We've been left homeless. We've been living in hell over the past 3 months." This is the sort of discontent the West must encourage. More attacks on Russian territory, be that missile and drone strikes or even invasions of other smaller regions, would show the country's people that Putin is far from the protector he claims to be. The riskiest part of the West's strategy would involve stoking non-ethnic sentiment in Russia. Funding separatist movements may be necessary. That could push Russia into a situation where it's fighting against its own while dealing with a multi-front war and rising negative public sentiment against Putin. Finally, there's the economic aspect. The West would also have to work hard to bring as much of the global South back around as possible by adopting policies that show them that the West will enrich them far more than working with Russia. And it must do all of this while making sure the sanctions it's implemented against Russia remain in place. Get that four-pronged approach right, and the West may have the recipe for unseating Putin and destroying the Russia he has created. But what do you think? Should the West try to remove Putin? Is it worth the risks? How would you approach trying to get rid of him? Let us know in the comments below, and thank you for watching. Now go and check out What If the US Invades Russia Hour by Hour, or click this other video instead.